Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the A Few Good Men on the Big Ten podcast. Bruce Hooley, Andy Anders with you. It's nice to have you with us this morning as we are 5 days away, Andy, from what are we terming this? Is this a rematch? Is this Ohio State Clemson part 3? Is this Ohio State Clemson part 4? Are we going all the way back and count the Woody Hayes game and call it Ohio State Clemson part 5? We gotta have the right branding on this college football semifinal before we start talking about it.
Well, it's not Urban anymore, so I feel like you can't brand it part 3. It's a different, certainly different team than in the '80s or whatever they played the first time. I think if I were, I'd call it the rematch. If this were happening under a normal year, where we expected this matchup in the spring, to be honest, and before all the COVID stuff. You would have just called this a rematch and talked how highly anticipated this game was. But COVID just really changed how you look at the context of college football in general. And it just doesn't feel like the same as if they had just played. If 2020 had been a regular football year off of last year, it just feels like so long ago, even though it was a year ago. And the same players mainly are going to be involved on at least on offense for both teams. So
yeah, I mean, it feels we can call it the sequel, but we don't have to say what number sequel it is. Like, you sort of lose track of some sequels, like Rocky. I can't keep track of the number of Rocky sequels.
Does Creed count that?
Yeah, Fast and Furious circle. This will be Fast and Furious, maybe, that's for sure. But it's going to be missing some of the headliners from last year's game, and not just because they were all Americans, but because they made huge contributions in the game. J.K. Dobbins is not going to be there. Chase Young obviously not going to be there, although Chase didn't have that big of an impact on the game a year ago. Jeff Okudah had a much bigger impact. He's not going to be there. Neither T. Higgins nor Justin Ross will be there. And Nolan Turner's not going to be there. The guy who ended the game with an interception of Justin Fields is not going to be there for the first half, and Isaiah Simmons is not going to be there. So we've got but there's still plenty of guys who are going to be there because Clemson and Ohio State, the brands survive even though some of the All-Americans leave.
Absolutely. The quarterback showdown is what everyone anticipated more than anything else, too. Fields and Lawrence, part 2. I think both are better players than they were last year, even if Justin struggled in 2 games this season. If he can figure out how to break the formula, that's the thing with him. He's honestly a better quarterback than he was last season. I know people watch that Indiana game or that Northwestern game, and they see some of the issues he had against those soft zone defenses, but he's done better about getting the ball out of his hands quicker. He's done better about knowing when to run. He looks more athletic. His completion percentage is generally higher. He's making better throws generally. If he can figure out how, because Brett Venables is going to send that same defense at him, you'd imagine. If he can figure out how to beat those types of defenses, this could be a quarterback duel for the ages. But he's going to have to, because if Fields isn't on his game, Ohio State really doesn't stand a chance in this one.
Yeah, last year, I mean, Lawrence was great with his legs. I didn't really think he was great throwing the football. And Clemson throwing the football really didn't hurt Ohio State like they hurt other opponents. Ohio State's secondary was so much better a year ago than it is right now. And, obviously you can look at the secondary. You can say Jordan Fuller. You can say Jeff Okudah. You can say Damon Arnett. But, a year ago, like they had Amir Reep and Jocelyn Wint. So they're not part of the program anymore either. So this year, is Ohio State's secondary going to be able to hold up? The pass rush is not as good as a year ago, but Clemson's wide receivers aren't as good as they were a year ago. And that'll be an interesting matchup. And then you mentioned Brent Venables and the defensive coordinator of Clemson. I think it's going to be interesting because what you outlined, Justin Fields had trouble with this year, soft zone coverage. That's not Brent Venables' calling card. That's the antithesis of Brent Venables' calling card. Does he shelve what Clemson likes to do and is really good at doing, blitzing and from different looks and all kinds of challenging coverages, and play what for Clemson is not at all part of their mentality, part of their mindset, which is soft zone coverage.
Well, it's not that Brent Venables is a conservative guy that he's good, that soft zones his bread and butter. It's that he's so versatile in his schemes. He can, if you've shown a weakness on film, he's going to exploit that weakness. And he'll probably run zone blitzes in front of the soft zones in the back. That's what I would expect in this game, is a lot of creative zone pressures on fields. So you're both aggressive and preventing the big play at the same time, because what you're essentially doing is one or two Fields' two biggest weaknesses. He looks for the big play too often down the field, and he holds the ball too long. So you're getting to him quicker by sending the zone pressure. By playing soft zones, you take away the big play. So what Fields is going to have to do in this game, at least early, if Venables is sending such zone pressures at him, is get the ball out of his hands fast to the underneath guys. If he's searching down the field, this Clemson defense, even their secondary, I don't think is as good as it's been this season. But most collegiate secondaries can take away the big play if they focus on it. And I think that's what Clemson's going to try to do early, and Fields is going to have to take the checkdowns until the deep stuff opens up later. I just can't see the downfield throws working until later in the game.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly focus on two Ohio State corners who went in the first round last year, Jeff Okudah, Damon Arnett. A.J. Terrell, Clemson corner, also went in the first round a year ago. So they'll have Darian Kendrick back, we think. But Nolan Turner being out the first half, maybe Ohio State's going to have to do its damage down the field early in the first half with Nolan Turner sitting because of targeting against Notre Dame. Special teams, I think Clemson's maybe a little bit better than a year ago. I'm not sure. Ohio State they haven't played enough for me to get a gauge on their kicking game, their placement game. I mean, they had some games where they missed a couple chippy field goals against Penn State. How would if the game come down to a 48-yard field goal for Ohio State, how would you feel about that?
I think Blake Hobbiel, for the most part, has been reliable. He missed the one chip shot kick against Penn State, but it was because he pulled his groin on the play. He got injured mid-kick. I don't know if you can fully pin that on him. And then it was a walk-on kicking the rest of the field goals in that game. Hobbiel's been reliable most of the other games they've played. He's made long field goals in his career. He made a 55-yarder against Northwestern last season. If he's fully healthy, I feel confident in Blake Hobbiel, honestly. And we all know Christman can do punting if he's back from COVID. So I would actually feel confident in Ohio State special teams heading into this game. And Matt Barnes has done a good job coordinating, I think. He's come up with some creative ways. They rush the punter sometimes. I wouldn't expect a block from Ohio State in this game. They haven't I don't know if they've had one this year, but I would say that in general they've had better special teams play in some of those other areas that just affect the field position game. They've had good punt coverage. They haven't had problems muffing kicks, which always seems to be a concern for Ohio State. Garrett Wilson has been steady receiving punts, even if he hasn't generated a lot of big plays. Now, I would feel confident in special teams heading into this game for Ohio State if Blake Hobbiel and Drew Chrisman are both healthy.
All right. Thank you for watching us today on Twitch. You can hit the follow button. It's the heart located at the bottom right of the screen. When you do that, you'll get a notification or an email every time we go live. We appreciate that. Watching us on the Chris Landry Football channel, make sure you go to LandryFootball.com. Find all the podcasts about all the college football, NFL football, recruiting, scouting, every aspect of football covered at LandryFootball.com, and it's right there for you in podcast format. And you can also watch all the live shows, including the show that follows us at the top of the hour, in defense of the Big 12. Okay, Andy, you mentioned if they have Drew Chrisman, if Blake Hobbiel's healthy. There's so many ifs about this game from the Ohio State perspective, and I'm not sure, and those ifs are all COVID related. I'm not sure we're going to know prior to kickoff exactly who's going to be out there for Ohio State, because I was talking to a couple guys yesterday who I've covered, bowl games for the last 25, 30 years with, and this lead up to this college football playoff game is unprecedented in the terms of no on-site press conferences. Everything's on Zoom. The teams are not arriving until day before. It's not at all your typical Sugar Bowl experience. The people of New Orleans love to host the Sugar Bowl. They love to show off their city. They love to show off their restaurants, their culture, all the things that make New Orleans unique. And there's none of that this year because of COVID. And so all those Ohio State players who sat out against Northwestern, we presume they're going to be back. but we don't know if they're going to be back. And we won't have Dabo Sweeney and Ryan Day on the same dais talking about this game. We won't have the opportunity to go up and talk to players. Last year, of course, Justin Fields was nursing a sore knee prior to the game against Clemson, coming off Ohio State's win over Michigan. And he made headlines before the game by candidly answering questions about his knee wasn't feeling 100%. This year, he'd get the same kinds of questions about his thumb that he sprained against Northwestern. He's not going to get or answer those questions this time around because he's not going to be as available as he was a year ago.
No, definitely a weird year media coverage wise. I mean, I've only covered I covered the last two bowl games for Ohio State, the Rose Bowl against Washington 2 years ago, and last year's playoff game against Clemson. And the unique opportunity, people don't realize that most of the year, Ohio State in general, the players are so closed off from the media that you have to essentially you sit in a press conference with 60 of your best friends, or maybe you get them on the practice field. Same situation, except everyone's huddled around them. And, you might get a couple questions in, but you don't get any one-on-one ability to, really dig into a story and ask good follow-up questions like you would for a normal feature. And if you were covering a smaller team, a smaller sport, or a team with more access. Then during the bowl week, there's at least one media availability when the entire team is made available to the press all at once, and you can go up and talk to anybody. And they usually do it in the locker room after the Big Ten championship game too. Of course, they didn't this year because of COVID, and they do it in the locker room after the bowl game as well. So those are three big media opportunities that aren't normally that are normally there that weren't there too. It is such a strange year media coverage wise, and as a result, I think less stuff is going to come out about not only the lead up to the game and the status of certain players and the mentality of certain players entering the game, but even after the game, why certain things happened the way they did, certain things that transpired. You had those great quotes about Chris Olave, his heartbreaking finish to the game last year, and people, you were able to go up and talk to him right after the game and get that immediate emotion, that immediate reaction. And you might get it through a Zoom call now, but it's not the same as being able to go up and actually talk to the players, the access you normally get at these bowl games. So I wouldn't be surprised to see less of those sorts of things come out.
No, you hit that exactly right. Final score a year ago was 29-23. That game, Clemson, Ohio State, has been on, I think, one of the ESPN channels ad nauseum here over the last few days. Have you rewatched it again? And if you did rewatch it again, what jumped out at you? What's the one thing? And, there were a lot of high points from that game, Andy, that a lot of people remember, but I always maintain that in a game that close, there are a lot of things that happen that have crucial impact that we tend to ignore because something else happens a little bit later on. That is maybe more of a tendency to stick in your mind. Just wonder if you've seen it a second time, a third time, and if so, what jumped out at you?
I haven't seen it a second time, but I've always thought one. I just haven't gotten the chance with family and everything to rewatch the past few days. But one thing that always stuck out to me that I never thought got talked about enough from that game, everyone remembers the two huge controversial officiating calls that went against Ohio State, the targeting call against Sean Wade, and then the overturn of the fumble return for touchdown. I have there's some stories about when those plays transpired, some things that happened in the press box that I won't share on the air here. But I saw things that I never thought I'd see from the Ohio State reporters, especially when the fumble was overturned in that game. I saw just actual physical reactions from the press box, and you almost never see that. You almost never see guys actually get emotional or actually get because it's a professional environment. But moving on from that, what I was saying is the J.K. Dobbins' injury never gets talked about enough from that game. He was dominating on the ground. Clemson couldn't stop him in the first half. He had a long touchdown run. He had another run that was 60 yards and got chased down. He had a wide open wheel route that should have been an easy touchdown grab, but Unfortunately, Fields overthrew it a little bit, and he had to lay out, and then and couldn't bring it in, and then Ohio State settled for a field goal. But he rolls over his ankle, and Master Teague enters the game, and he gets 9 yards on 8 carries. There was a clear difference between the two of them.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things where people always talk about those two officiating calls, man. And whether or not you can give Clemson those calls. If J.K. Dobbins doesn't roll his ankle, I think Ohio State still wins that game. He came back later, but he was clearly not the same player. He couldn't cut on that ankle as much anymore. He was basically just a check down option in the passing game from then on in, and he got some yards that way, but he wasn't the same back the rest of the game when he came back in even.
Yeah, there were two things. That's a great point about J.K. Dobbins. I mean, it really alleviated Clemson having to worry about that aspect of Ohio State's offense. There were two things in that game that struck me as I rewatch it. There's Ohio State is faced with like a 2nd and 1 from about its own 29-yard line in the second half. 2nd and 1. And for some reason, it inexplicably threw on 2nd down, and then on 3rd down, one of the few times all night Clemson got penetration and stopped J.K. Dobbins short. And Ohio State had to punt the football, and I thought that was a juncture of the game where Ohio State had kind of taken control. And then there was another play where Ohio State's up, I think it was 16-0 or 13-0, and Justin Fields threw down the seam to K.J. Hill in the end zone. And I don't know if the lights got in K.J. Hill's eyes or what, but the ball hit him in the helmet. Like, he's got his hands right here, and the ball hit him in the helmet and went incomplete. Now, the Clemson corner arrived a little bit late. Well, actually a little bit early. He actually interfered with KJ on the play, got there, but it was bang, bang. I wouldn't have expected a call. But that's not who KJ Hill was throughout his career. He made so many big plays for Ohio State, and the pass was there. It was catchable. It was perfectly thrown, and KJ Hill just flat didn't get his hands up to catch it. So those plays vanish in the course of, the scoop fumble, the targeting, the Chris Olave breaking off his route, Nolan Turner intercepting. But those kinds of plays. And then there was also on Trevor Lawrence's long touchdown run right before the half. Baron Browning is within, he could literally put his hand on Trevor Lawrence's back right as Trevor Lawrence broke through the line. And Baron Browning didn't dive. And because he didn't dive, Trevor Lawrence then cut and gained some separation from Baron Browning. And I also forgot how Josh Proctor whiffed on that play. I
didn't forget that.
Lawrence is coming right at him, and he just juked him, and Proctor went down. And so, it's indicative to me of a couple things. Number one, how close these teams are, because if one of those plays goes the other way, it could decide the outcome of the game. And it also, I'm sure Ohio State's players haven't forgotten their own individual inability to make a play in that particular situation when given it. And I'm sure that has been driving them all through the offseason. And I'm sure that it brings it all home again now that they're going to get a second shot at Clemson at 8 o'clock on Friday night.
Yeah, I'd be expecting, honestly, I'd be watching Chris Olave big in this game. He's fresh off obviously the COVID that kept him out of the Northwestern, the Big Ten championship game. What happened last year was just so huge for him motivating entering this year. I might expect a big game from Chris Olave if they're able to get the ball to him.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's going to be a great game. I think 29-23 last time was a one-score football game. Ohio State's driving in position to score and win it. Do you expect a high-scoring game? Do you expect it to be not as high-scoring this year? What do you expect?
I'd expect a higher-scoring game than last year. 29-23 isn't a high-scoring game. Even if you look back, the older championship, think of how good the Ohio State-Alabama game was in 2014, and there was plenty of great defense played in that game. It was a 42-35 game. Normally in big bowl games, really good games, there's still going to be both teams are at or above 30 points. 29-23 is a pretty low-scoring final game, and that was a really good game. But these defenses, especially, they aren't the same. Ohio State secondary, not nearly where it was, as we've talked about. I think front seven locks that bell cow rusher. I actually think Ohio State's front seven as a whole is better than last year. A lot of people would agree with me on that because of the loss of Chase Young. And I'll agree that at defensive end, they miss him a little bit. But I think they're better at D tackle. with Haskell Garrett. They don't have as much depth, but Haskell Garrett, Tommy Togiai penetrate as well as anyone in the country. And they have their linebackers are better than last year. And I think that's it took a couple games for them to get to that point because they shuffled positions around. But I think their linebackers are a lot better than last season. And that's the main difference why I think the front seven overall is better. A little bit behind at defensive end, a little bit ahead at D tackle, and then completely better at linebacker. But that all being said, it's such a huge drop off from last year for Ohio State, and that just doesn't get fixed from a Big Ten title game to a college football playoff game. Some of the issues were still there against Northwestern. They were better, especially in the second half, but in a normal 12 game with a Big Ten title game season, maybe those secondary issues could have been fixed to some extent, or it kind of schemed around for Ohio State, but they just didn't have the time to tool with that. So I think Clemson's definitely going to score plenty, and whether or not this is an actual good game, a good playoff game, is going to depend on if Ohio State can also score. Find success against Clemson's defensive sets, and Trey Sermon really going to have to go out and do what he did against Northwestern. I think too they're going to need a solid running back in this game, because if you become one-dimensional, then Clemson's defense is too good to move the ball against.
Our podcast is sponsored by American Betting Experts, one of the largest licensed sports and casino vendors in the U.S. You can go to LandryFootball.com for a special offer. You click on the icon in the upper right, and then you pick the sports betting outfit that is legal in your area. You'll get a match of up to $100, up to $1,000. American Betting Experts, the official sponsor of the A Few Good Men on the Big Ten podcast. Okay. We've wondered, Andy, this disparity in games. Clemson's gotten to play, almost twice as many games as Ohio State. What about, and you can talk to that, whether you think that's an advantage for Ohio State or not, I don't know. But you just touched on something that I find interesting. You talked about fixing the issues in the secondary. Obviously, fixing any issue that you have as a football team requires time. And always before, in a game of this magnitude, each team has had much longer to prepare for the other than they have now. Holy cow, I remember back in 2002 when Ohio State played Miami for the national championship. Ohio State played Michigan the Friday of Thanksgiving week and didn't play again until like January the 10th. I mean, they had like 50 days to get ready for Miami, and I think they needed him. I think that helped Ohio State, actually, because that Miami team was so multiple. In this scenario, a year ago, Ohio State plays the championship game for the Big Ten on the first weekend of December, and then has 3+ weeks to get ready. In this scenario, this year, you got about 10 days, and we don't even know. Because Ohio State had so many guys out with COVID from Northwestern, we don't even know who's been able to practice, and can they actually practice, or is it like a Zoom practice, a mental practice, a walkthrough practice? Just touch on that aspect of it for Ohio State, fixing some things or putting things in for Clemson. I do think it helps that they played Clemson a year ago, so you're not starting from square one. But that's kind of another aspect of this matchup that is different than a year ago.
Yeah, absolutely. The difference in preparation, Ohio State knows how to prepare in a week for a team, but it's different when you're talking about bowl practices, especially because there's different pieces of your team that you're going to have to use to beat a team like Clemson, right? You're going to have to get deeper into some rotations with players. You're going to have to experiment with different schemes that maybe you haven't used as much throughout the year. For example, I think Justin Fields is probably going to have to run the ball more in this game to open Ohio State's offense. It takes practice to implement those plays and get them down the way that you have the plays you've been running the entire year. So having extra bowl practices helps for that reason, and it helps for developing younger players. It hurts. It hurts both teams equally, though. I think that the difference for Ohio State, like you said, you hit it right on the head, is that you have a group of guys who aren't going to be there. We know for a fact Chris Olave, Baron Browning, anyone who tested positive the week of the Northwestern game is going to miss at least some practice time in the run-up to the bowl week. Don't know exactly how much, but they're not going to be fully involved in practices, at least early. They might be back with the team now because it's a minimum 10 days that you have to quarantine. You have to be by yourself. So that aspect of it is just so detrimental when you're trying to build chemistry and learn a scheme to beat a team like a Clemson. And so just another thing working against Ohio State in this game. At the very least, it's not. I mean, Chris Olave and Baron Browning are guys that are experienced players. They're not new to their position. They're guys that played against this team last year. If it had to happen to a couple guys on this team missing some practice time, those would be two of the better ones. You know, it's not Fields having to sit out and not learn how to attack Brett Venables' defense. It's not one of the younger guys like a Marcus Hooker or Josh Proctor or Seven Banks guys that are going to need those reps to really make an impact or to hide their weaknesses against Clemson. It's an interesting detail with the game this year, and I'd like to hear what you think of it, Bruce, because
Well, I just think Ohio State has a lot of things they have to button up on the defensive side to contend with everything that Clemson can do. The fact that J.K. Dobbins is not here to break the game open, and I just don't know how much stock to put in Trey Sermon's performance against Northwestern. You know, Notre Dame hurt Clemson running the football in their first game in South Bend, but Clemson was missing James Skalski and another linebacker, and when Clemson is healthy on defense, and they're healthy now, they're a different defense than they were that night in South Bend. So this one to me, Ohio State a year ago felt like the favorite. This year they feel like an underdog. I think the touchdown spread is about right. But it wouldn't surprise me a bit if Ohio State wins this game. The thing that I keep wondering if we're going to actually get the game we expect, or if COVID is going to have one last laugh on us and somebody's going to be missing that, Ohio State really needs. And the guy who hasn't had it yet is Justin Fields. And I mean, that would just be like, you talk about a buzzkill, man.
A lot of Ohio State fans are hating you for that, Jinx, right there.
That would be such a buzzkill. But I bring it up not in the sense of I expect that, but in the sense that guys get injured, they get knocked out for a play. Even a year ago, Trevor Lawrence got knocked out for a play. And I wonder what would Ohio State do if Justin Fields is knocked out of this game? Do we know who the backup quarterback is? Because we clearly know who Clemson's backup quarterback is, and DJ Uiagalelei has gotten a lot of time. He got to play the entire game in South Bend because of Trevor Lawrence having to sit out for COVID. What do we think Ohio State would do at the quarterback position if Justin Fields had to go out to get taped, or if he had to go out to just get his bearings for a play or two? What would Ohio State do at the backup quarterback position?
Well, it'd either be C.J. Stroud or Jack Miller. We don't really know between the two because they've both been used interchangeably as the backup this year. Jack Miller enters one game, C.J. Stroud enters the next. Ryan Day's kept it a secret, and I think for this exact reason. He doesn't want Clemson and Brent Venables to know who the backup is. If catastrophe happens, at least they don't know how to prepare for it, how to respond to it. They don't know the strengths and weaknesses of those two quarterbacks. I'd say what you look at, depending on who's in, really you'd have to adjust to a much simpler scheme on offense. Justin Fields has been in the offense multiple years now. His second year as a starter with Ryan Day, he's had more complex progressions, different pass schemes they've used. Miller and Stroud are freshmen, and you're going to have to simplify the playbook. I think both are capable runners. They're not Fields running the ball, but they're both capable runners. So you can keep some of the quarterback running game that I think Ohio State will implement against Clemson. But if they come in, I mean, there'll be a huge drop-off from Fields. There's no doubt about it. And the Ohio State playbook, I think, will get much skinnier, much slimmer, lose some weight as a result, if that catastrophe did happen.
Give me an aspect for this game, Andy, that you think will be a lot bigger factor this year than it was a year ago. I'll say with Clemson. I think Clemson is going to involve the tight end a lot more than it did a year ago. I think Braden Galloway is a guy that Ohio State's really going to have to scheme for at the tight end position. And tight end a year ago was the thing Clemson typically features, but didn't feature then because Galloway had to sit out all the regular season. But back when Ohio State played them in, was it 2016? Jordan Leggett was a huge option for Clemson and was a big part of their first national championship against Alabama. I think the tight end is back in the Clemson offense, and that's something that Ohio State's really going to have to be aware of. And I don't want to take the obvious one from Ohio State's offense. I won't leave that on the table for you. But is there an aspect for Ohio State? Maybe it's a defensive aspect, or maybe it is an offensive aspect. Something that Clemson a year ago thought, we don't have to really worry about that much. But this year they do have to pay attention to.
Well, I mean, the obvious one that you're hinting at that I've touched on a couple of times briefly is Fields' legs. I totally agree with what you said about the tight ends, and that would have been mine if you hadn't brought it up there already. I think that Clemson, the tight end, a good tight end in an offense, in a passing offense, really takes a lot away from what you can do at linebacker with a defense. I think that's key to some of Clemson's passing game success this year without some of the top end receivers they've had in the past, is that when the tight end's an option, it forces the linebackers to kind of spread out. It forces the safeties to kind of respect the vertical and the seam game with that tight end. And it gives space to other guys, and it gives more space to the running game even. But for mine, Justin Fields' legs, obviously last year he was hindered in that game. He wasn't at 100%. That knee brace, Ohio State didn't really use him on the ground as much. And we saw Lawrence's legs get used a ton to open up Clemson's offense last year. And you look at any steady game film of Ohio State, when Fields is running the ball, the offense opens up in so many different ways. Because all he has to do is break off one run, and now the defense has an eye on him the rest of the game. He doesn't have to run it 20 times. But if you can get him to break off one big play on a keeper, one big play on a scramble or a draw, just make them aware of it is what you have to do. Make them respect Fields running the ball. Passing lanes will open up down the field. It'll take at least one defender out of the equation for the running back on every play because they'll have to assign somebody to take Fields on those zone read gives. So Fields' legs are going to be the aspect of Ohio State's offense that's going to be different from last year to this, I think. If Brian Day has any wits about him, he's going to have to use all the tools in his toolbox to attack this Clemson team. It's now or never. You run Fields or you don't, and there's no reason not to anymore.
A couple questions from our Facebook audience today. Rich wants to know our thoughts on Brett Bielema as the new head coach of Illinois. So far, the only coaching change in the Big Ten. Tom Allen is up and has won a couple National Coach of the Year awards. Good for Tom Allen. I would keep my eye on Pat Fitzgerald becoming the new head coach of the Chicago Bears. But that has not happened yet. Kirk Ferentz finally at the end of the rope at Iowa. Is he going to retire? Iowa's bowl game against Missouri has been canceled because of COVID, which is unfortunate for Iowa. They really pulled it together. Maybe he's excited about next season. But Brett Bielema, who was an Iowa player, an Iowa assistant coach, Brett Bielema has coached under some great turnarounds. Bill Snyder at Kansas State, Hayden Fry at Iowa, and obviously Barry Alvarez at Wisconsin. But he did grow up on the Iowa-Illinois border. So what do we think of Brett Bielema being the next head coach of the Illinois Fighting Illini, Andy?
I think that's honestly a really good hire for them. Like you said, some experience in the area. The time at Wisconsin, I think, really helps. Yeah. So hopefully COVID ain't creeping into my house. But Brett Bielema, I think the experience at Wisconsin, he knows the Big Ten footprint. They have the talent bases around Illinois and some of the old connections he made at Wisconsin to go out and recruit the kind of players he wants to run the schemes he wants. My only concern for him is that if, we saw what Harbaugh's done at Michigan in terms of his offensive schemes kind of passing him by. I wonder if Wisconsin's power running games and play action are starting to go out of style with the schemes that Bielema ran there, and then I'm sure he'll try to implement it in Illinois to start. That would be my only concern, but I think as far as someone who's going to implement a good program culture, someone who's a good recruiter who was a good recruiter at Wisconsin, had those connections, I think it's a great hire for Illinois. But yeah, the question of whether or not those offensive sets can continue to hold up, it'll be interesting to see. I think Wisconsin is very well suited to continue running those just because they play in cold weather and they have they always recruit those big 300-pound offensive linemen that you can move the rock with like that. But can it work at Illinois if you go run it there? And I think that'll be interesting to see if Bielema sticks to that plan.
Yeah, it's not been Illinois' MO when Illinois has been really good. They've always been a place that has had, when they're good, other than the Juice Williams era, but I'm thinking back to Jeff George and back during some of the years John Malkovich was there when he had Jason Verduzco. They like to throw the football, and that's hard to do in that stadium on certain November Saturdays because that stadium is the real wind tunnel. It does, to me, set up kind of a way that the West is going to play. Iowa is not going to change the way it plays. It's a play-action football team, likes to run the football. Wisconsin, same thing with Paul Chryst. Now Illinois is adopting that. Nebraska is obviously, with Scott Frost, zone read, option type football. So that's kind of interesting that the West is now acquiring this approach to how it plays football. Brett Bielema plays into that. I, too, think he's a pretty good hire for Illinois, given who he is. And I'd say, too, Brett Bielema is looked upon as a guy who failed at Arkansas. His record at Arkansas is not that bad. He had one bad year at Arkansas. I think it was more of a lack of being in touch with reality at Arkansas in terms of what they aspired to be. They kind of, think they should be winning the SEC West. I don't think that's going to happen. And so maybe they got rid of Brett Bielema a little sooner than they otherwise should have. He actually did go to a bowl game a couple times at Arkansas. So we'll see. I think Illinois will be a slow build for him. It all depends on, can he get the right lineman? Can he get the right running back? But Illinois, even under Lovie Smith, ran the football pretty well. I was surprised to find out they led the Big Ten in rushing twice, which I did not know that. So I think he fits. I think it's a pretty good hire. Sometimes you get the best guy you can get. Sometimes you get the best guy who fits. And I actually think Brett Bielema is the guy on both those counts. I think he's the best guy they could have gotten. And I think he's the best guy who fits. So I think that's a pretty good hire by Illinois. Another question coming in about Dwayne Haskins, former Ohio State quarterback. Amazing one season as starter, 50 touchdown passes. Led him to a Rose Bowl win, which you covered that Rose Bowl win over Washington. What about Dwayne Haskins from a maturity standpoint? His decision-making with the Washington Redskins is reported to be lack of attention to detail, lack of study, lack of buy-in, lack of work ethic. Our long view of Dwayne Haskins as an NFL quarterback, Andy, are we surprised or are we not surprised?
I'm surprised. Honestly, covering him for a year, and that was my first year actually on the Ohio State beat, I was writing daily stories at that point as an unpaid intern for Rivals. It was a great year that I remember well, and he really always came off to me as not just having the arm talent to succeed at the next level, but what's even more important than that is having the football mind and the willingness to go out and do the mental things you have to do as a quarterback in the NFL. Because you can have all the talent in the world. It doesn't matter when you get to the National Football League. You have to have that mental side. And unfortunately, that's what's been lacking. And I thought it would be a strength for him. I thought this recent incident just shows a real lack of maturity from him. He always carried himself very well whenever we talked to him in press conferences. He came off as a guy who really understood the offense, and maybe Ryan Day just had a certain impact on him as a quarterback coach. Ryan Day is a great quarterback coach. He doesn't have that same. Washington's never bought into him. Yeah. And I thought that was a big part of it at the beginning. Washington hired a coach that actually didn't want him in the end. He was set up to fail there. Bad offensive line, one good receiving weapon, and Terry McLaurin. But this it doesn't excuse laziness. A bad situation doesn't excuse you avoiding the things you need to do to be successful when you're handed this kind of an opportunity. I mean, going to a strip club without a mask, it's almost I was blown away when I heard it. And it's just not something I ever expected from him, given how he carried himself at Ohio State. Maybe that was just Ohio State's program, but I don't know.
I think you did a nice job of summarizing the fact that this is more than just Dwayne Haskins. This is an organization that he went to that's had problems, that has infighting. I mean, when Daniel Snyder is alleging that one of his partners was trying to extort him and get him to sell the Redskins, they're not all on the same page with the Washington Redskins, the Washington
football team. Yeah.
Again, they don't have a nickname, so what does that tell you? 1 out of 32 teams in the NFL. So I think that there's responsibility on both counts. I thought in the very beginning that it was not necessarily the greatest thing for Dwayne Haskins to go to the Washington football team because he's from Upper Marlboro, Maryland, and that's his hometown team. And I think it's tough for any young man who has that much money in his pocket, that much expectation of an NFL team on his back, and all his friends are around him. There are just a lot of distractions to fight that you don't have to fight. Let's say he's gone to the Arizona Cardinals as the quarterback of the future in Arizona. You know, there you are kind of alone. You bond with your coach, your position coach, your head coach, and you dial in and tunnel in on just the football. There's a lot of things going on around Dwayne Haskins because he's coming back home, the hero, the savior, the first-round pick, all that kind of stuff that I think is challenging. I'm not excusing, as Andy said, his lack of work ethic and stuff like that. But I think when you're not Peyton Manning and you're not like single-minded in your pursuit of NFL success, toss in those other things, it can lead to the kind of situation that we're seeing here. I think he's going to need a fresh start. He's a first-round pick, a 15th pick overall. So the league's not going to give up on him yet because they just don't do that. First-rounders get chance after chance after chance after chance, and he can throw the football. Now, he's hurt himself with these immature decisions that he's made. And when you're a quarterback who has a reputation of not working hard and devoting yourself to your task, that's a problem. So there's not going to be the market for him that there would be for someone else. But someone will like Dwayne Haskins, and someone in the ego-driven world of the NFL will believe they can change him and reclaim him and rescue him. But I think he's done in Washington after this season, and that might be best for him, and I think it might be best for the Washington football team as well.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% there.
All right, one final thing, Andy, before we wrap this up and hand it over to our friends at the Big 12 for the in defense of the Big 12 at the top of the hour, and that is also another NFL rumor. A week ago today, a friend of mine in the National Football League texted me and said, and it was not Chris Spielman, by the way, nor was it his brother Rick Spielman. A friend of mine in the NFL texted me and he said, Urban Meyer is putting together a staff. He's approaching people to put together a staff for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I was like, what? And I waited all week to see if that would leak out. Well, it finally did over the weekend. And I just want you to, now that the Jags have the #1 overall pick and will certainly use it on Trevor Lawrence, what do you think? Urban Meyer, is he coming back? He turned down the Texas Longhorns. Did you turn down the Texas Longhorns to coach the Jacksonville Jaguars?
Oh, that's my reaction, Bruce. I don't know how. I mean, the reports out there that he's talked to the Jags through intermediaries. Essentially, my guy talks to your guy. Hey, kind of like Urban's expressed real interest from the reports. It's just the way he's talked in the past. And I know how big of a deal his health is to him, to his family, and that it would have to be just the ideal job for him to go take it. And I always thought there was a short list of about maybe 5 to 10 teams, combined college and pro, that he would consider. And Jacksonville was not on that list. Jacksonville, I was telling you before the game, if you were trying to list every team in the NFL just off the top of your head, Jacksonville would probably be the one you forget. They don't have any tradition. They aren't any sort of brand, which is what Urban wants to coach. His #1 NFL job, he's said in the past, is the Cowboys. If he wanted to go coach in the NFL, it would be with Dallas, I would think. Or maybe with another big brand like Green Bay or something. I don't know. The Bears. So a brand with reputation. Jacksonville doesn't have that. He also wants to coach at a place he's set up. Jacksonville isn't that right now. They're one of the worst teams in the league. They're going to get a great player in this draft, but it's going to take some time to build around that player. The only thing that I think Jacksonville might be able to provide him that he wants in a head coaching job, and maybe he just wants a shot at the NFL in general, I don't know. But he's going to want control. It's going to have to be him running the show. No interference from ownership. Maybe there's a GM in name, but Urban is making the calls. And Jacksonville can offer that to him. That's the one advantage, I think, that and the fact that he lives in Florida. He can coach close to home. But outside those two things, and maybe that is enough to pull him, and maybe he just wants an NFL shot real bad. To me, it just doesn't feel like a job that he would actually take. But if he's putting his staff together and he's reaching out through intermediaries, it sounds like there's genuine interest, Bruce. I don't know. What do you make of it?
Well, I share your skepticism, but I also think you hit on very well the things that if he did it, you'd go, yeah, okay. Complete and total control, Trevor Lawrence, Shad Khan, bottomless pit of money, and, geography. The Florida Panhandle is not where I want to live, but I never lived there. All I know about Jacksonville is I was in the hardest rainstorm I've ever been in my life when I was driving through Jacksonville. I'm sure it's lovely at other times of the year, just not happened to be on the day I was driving through it. I think, he could set up his son-in-law, Corey Dennis, as his offensive coordinator or as his head coach. Would that be the smartest thing to do? I don't know, but I mean, he could do it. And then my question to my friend from the NFL was, is he interested in it as a head coach or as a team president? And my friend said, I don't really know. So going as team president, that opens up a lot of other possibilities. But I would say it wouldn't shock me, because here's the thing I know about Urban Meyer. He loves building. He loves perfecting. He loves honing. He loves innovating. I think the NFL would excite him because it's something he's not done. It's a frontier he has not tried to conquer. So we'll see. I think it has – I will say this. I think every time a story comes out and people start talking about it, it diminishes by about 5% his chances of taking it. I've always felt like his likelihood to return was going to be a completely out of the blue return. Nobody knew it was coming. Boom, here he is. He's the man. Because I think once everybody starts to get to know about it, I think he hears things. And I think that the general consensus in the media coverage and in the people who he might be talking to is, wait a minute, are you sure you want to do this? You sure this is good for you? You know, your life doesn't speak right now. So I would say that a week ago, as long as it stayed quiet, I gave it about a 50-50. Now I think I give it only about a 30% chance. And would he run Trevor Lawrence on the zone read, Andy?
Would I run Trevor Lawrence on the zone read?
Would Urban Meyer's head coach run Urban's quarterback? Urban's quarterback carry it 200 times a year in a college season.
Yeah, we all remember how much JT Barrett ran the football. You can't. Trevor Lawrence is a big dude. Maybe he can take that much punishment. I don't know. Zone read, you have to have really athletic quarterbacks to run a zone read in the NFL, and I actually don't know if Trevor Lawrence can do that with a lot of success. He'll throw it with plenty of success. I have no doubt Trevor Lawrence will be a great NFL quarterback, but just as a runner.
Urban ran Josh Harris at BG. He ran Alex Smith at Utah. He ran JT Barrett, Braxton Miller at Ohio State.
Those were all college, though, Bruce. They didn't have to sit back in zone and then come up and rail you. I don't know. I haven't seen Urban in the NFL. That's the thing. I want to see Urban in the NFL. I don't think he's going to take the Jags job. When I heard it, I was like, there's like a 2% chance of that happening. Now I'm up to about 10.
Yeah.
But, I do actually really want to see Urban in the NFL. I want to see how he coaches in the NFL. I want to see what it looks like when he's dealing with the draft instead of recruiting, because he's a great coach. And I think it'd be really interesting to see how he handles at the NFL level. Sam has always wanted to see a successful Nick Saban at the NFL level. I want to see. I'm just curious to see how he would pan out. You know.
All right, before we go, and we've gone very long today because we've had a lot to talk about, do you want to make a pick on the Sugar Bowl? I'm not going to force you to, but do you want to make a pick on the Sugar Bowl?
And we got to. We can't just sit the fence here, Bruce.
We can't. No, we can. We run the podcast. We can do whatever we want.
I'll make a pick. In my life, I've never once picked against Ohio State. And I've thought it over time and time again. You're familiar with Tim May, I'm sure.
Tim and I are longtime friends.
Well, good. He I'm sure you've heard him say then that you're never wrong if you pick Ohio State, whether you're right or wrong in the end. So I was actually going to pick Clemson, and I have a weekly prediction thing with rivals. And I was going to have this long thing about I've never picked against Ohio State as a fan, as a reporter. I was a fan before I was a reporter, and then as a reporter, I've always picked the Buckeyes, and I've honestly believed they were going to win every game I picked them. But I was going to pick against them until Dabo Swinney made the comments he made, putting Ohio State 11th. I was taught growing up, you never give the other team bulletin board material. Not that Ohio State needs added motivation in this, but they have it now. And this will be a game about proving for Ohio State that they belong, because Dabo Swinney made it that. I think if you get kicked in the mouth like that and you don't respond, which they will, because Ryan Day is a great coach, I think, and I think Ohio State is a team that will respond well to getting hit in the mouth like that. I'm actually going to pick the Buckeyes. I changed my mind after seeing all that. I think it'll be a hard-fought game, but I pick Ohio State. Final score 38-31. Bruce, what do you say?
Well, I'm sort of like you in that as I look at this game from an X and O standpoint, and all the other things that typically would frame my pick on a football game, everything tells me Clemson. Not by a lot, but Clemson. But I believe in karma and storylines, and it just is too tidy of a story to have Chris Olave out with COVID in the Big Ten title game and then come back to play Clemson after last year. And I just think this game is going to be a Chris Olave, Justin Fields rewriting the script from the ending of last year's Fiesta Bowl. I just think that's how it's going to end. I've seen these kinds of things happen many times in my career where The outcome doesn't make a lot of sense, X's and O wise, but from an emotion and Hollywood script perspective, it just sort of happens. I've also seen in the BCS era, and again in the college football playoff era, very often the team that everybody says doesn't belong there ends up being the team that is holding the trophy at the end. And so not only am I going to pick Ohio State over Clemson, I'm going to pick Notre Dame over Alabama. And I'm going to predict an Ohio State-Notre Dame national championship game, and Ohio State, I think, is going to win it. So I can't defend that on X's and O basis. I think Ohio State has a lot more holes and a lot more vulnerability than it did a year ago. But I'm just picking it because I think it makes total sense that a Big Ten team that, had its season canceled in a weird 2020 of COVID, I'm counting on the stars to align and there to be a nonsensical finish to a season that's had its fits and starts. So that's why I'm picking Ohio State.
I couldn't agree more.
We'll see.
Some nonsense.
We'll see. That'll do it for us. Thanks for watching. Those of you who've watched on Twitch, thanks for watching us and follow us. And we appreciate it very much. We'll turn it over to our friends from the Big 12 next. Make sure you go to LandryFootball.com for all the latest on all the aspects of football that you enjoy, be it scouting, college, NFL, high school, recruiting, whatever it is, we got it covered for you at LandryFootball.com. Andy, great being with you. We'll talk to you again soon.
Absolutely.